Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's in-service training, Elements of Healthy Aging. Today's topic is greater protein intakes are associated with improved body composition. We'll also have 3 additional sessions. Upcoming, we have June 8th, July 13th, and July 27th, and all sessions will begin at 3:30 Eastern Standard Time. This webinar is brought to you by our multi-state team. Hi, I'm Wendy Lynch, Extension Agent with the University of Florida. Julie England, Extension Agent Emeritus from the University of Florida. Dr. Wendy Dahl, Associate Professor, Extension Specialist at the University of Florida. Dr. Carlin Raffi, Assistant Professor and Extension Specialist with Virginia Polytechnic Institute and State University. Dr. Julie Garden Robinson, Professor and Food Nutrition Specialist at North Dakota State University. And Kendra Zamoyski, Regional Specialized FCS Agent with the University of Florida. A few tidbits for today's in-service training. We have a certificate of attendance that will be available at the end of the Qualtrics evaluation, which you'll receive following today's session. All of our sessions will be recorded and emailed to those who are unable to attend. No certificate will be available for those viewing the recording. Please complete that short evaluation that will be sent following today's session. And if you do like the session, tell your coworkers. We'd love for you to share. A few Zoom features, just reminding you at the bottom, if you may need to hover your mouse to get that toolbar to pop up, click on that chat box, that little chat window, and it should open up on the side or somewhere on your screen. And you have the option to send a message or comment or feedback in that chat to either panelists only or to all participants. A brief disclaimer. The information provided is for educational purposes only. Reference to a commercial product does not constitute an endorsement by the webinar team members or their institutions. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Julie Garden Robinson to introduce today's speaker.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Sherry Nordstrom Stasny is a professor and a colleague of mine in the Department of Health, Nutrition, and Exercise Sciences here at North Dakota State University in Fargo. She is a board-certified specialist in sports dietetics with the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, and she is a member of the dietetics faculty, a mentor for graduate and undergraduate students from a variety of disciplines, and she has developed and led research studies and classes in nutrition for human performance and all aspects of food and food service management since 2002. Dr. Stasny is a gerontologist and has an overall interest in healthy aging and well-being of individuals across the lifespan. So welcome, Sherry, and I hope the technology works.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to speak. We're very excited to be able to share background from the results from some of our studies and some of the context and lit review to put together our studies. This is literally making me multitask. All right, we're good at that as dietitians. I have about 35 slides. And I will take questions. I prefer questions at the end. I'm fairly flexible, but we're on a little bit of a clock here. However, some of my slides are interactive. I have to give a shout out to our sponsors. The depth and breadth of what we do at NDSU among my research team would not work if we didn't have help from especially the North Dakota Beef Commission, but also the other organizations shown here on the slide. I also have to give a shout out to NDSU, who's been very supportive of what we do, to our entire team. We've done, 7 or 8 studies in the last 7 or 8 years that get around muscle health and muscle quality. Dr. Kyle Hackney and I have been the PIs and primary investigators on all of these projects, either Dr. Hackney or with me being the primary investigator. Dr. Hackney happens to be a certified strength and conditioning coach, and he was not able to join us today. He's also our grad coordinator, and it's finals week, so all the graduate students are in a big hurry to finish. Dr. Hackney is an exercise physiologist and a skeletal muscle scientist. He did a postdoc and still does a lot of collaborations with NASA, where a lot of this research was done. A lot of it also comes out of McMaster University in Canada. Anyway, I also have to thank some of our other key research scientists on the team. So Dr. Chris Katarski and Dr. Kara Troutman, who are now assistant professors out at Skidmore, and Gustavus Adolphus, were integral in logistics and methods with our studies, getting things done, data analysis. And then we have Fanny Johnson, who's still a PhD student with not only me, I think he also works for Dr. Julie Garden Robinson off and on. And he's really great with stats and biochemistry and a lot of things that have made our study successful. And we are also really lucky to have at NDSU a undergraduate program in both dietetics and exercise science. So tons of undergraduate students have helped us to conduct these studies, and it just adds layers of goodness when you've got multiple hands on deck when you're working with human research subjects. So in the context of a study completed at NDSU going back to 2018 and finishing up data collection in 2020, we tested 192 women aged 18 to 79, and I'll explain why in a minute here. But the overall presentation today, I want to be able to share when more dietary protein is needed during the lifespan. So that's why we recruited women aged 18 to 80. Instead of just recruiting older women, we started at age 18. How much protein is needed and from what sources, and then also to describe and discuss the synergistic role with exercise and dietary protein feeding to counteract sarcopenia. And I'll spell out the definition of sarcopenia for those of you who are not familiar on the next couple slides here. So the purpose of the study that started in 2018 with the 192 women was to dig into research with sarcopenia. So much of the published research on sarcopenia is the loss of muscle mass. Many of these studies are based on what the study is called elderly, which to me, the term elderly is condescending. I prefer the term older adult as a gerontologist. So much of the published work is on based on data on older adults and particularly men. There's not a lot of research conducted with older or any women. And frankly, a lot of the studies regarding muscle health and muscle quality are conducted with people that are already frail, so they can't even get up and down out of a chair because they've already lost so much muscle. So we wanted to do a study that wasn't just frail individuals, was not just males, but also females. And some of our studies are men and women, but the study I'm going to talk about today is only women. And we wanted to look at signs or risk factors for muscle loss before it's too late. So before they're frail. So in our cross-sectional study, we wanted to, the number one on the slide here, we wanted to observe the relationship between dietary protein intake and neuromuscular health across the aging process. So neuromuscular health, that's kind of a mouthful, but it gets beyond just muscle mass or muscle strength. Neuromuscular health is, biomechanics, functional abilities. And we've tried to measure it up with muscle quality. What is muscle quality? There's no clear definition in the literature. So I'll talk about how we try to define muscle quality. We also wanted to dig into what are people eating? What are the commonly consumed foods? So a lot of the studies with sarcopenia muscle loss will report how many grams protein they consume per day or per week or whatever time period, but it doesn't say what kinds of foods or what types of amino acids, nor when the foods are consumed. So do we need to eat 3 square meals a day? We wanted to dig in to some of that. And then we also wanted to look at associations between dietary protein intake and body fat percentage. So body composition, how fat infiltrates the muscles as we get older. How does that affect your risk of frailty and sarcopenia as women get older? And then controlling for other lifestyle factors, such as to be even eligible for our studies, tobacco use was not allowed, for example. People had to be healthy by health screenings that we employed. They had to be able to, they had to be able to ambulate. They had to be able to complete the testing in our lab, which includes muscle work. Oh, yes, and I have the Zoom view where I can't see the right-hand side of my slide. I forgot to mention on the right-hand side of the slide, I'm featuring the rectus femoris, which is oftentimes used in muscle quality studies as representative of the other muscles of the body. We like to use the rectus femoris upper leg because it's a large muscle. All right, so why are these studies important? As a gerontologist, I'm trained in the study of healthy aging. We want to, as gerontologists, affect public policy or recommendations for increasing independence in life. So we want to keep people out of the nursing home as they get older. We want to keep people to where they can take care of themselves. So this is kind of a busy slide. Focus your eye gaze, if you could, on the lower left-hand corner at the graph. So there's a graph, you've got your X and Y axis with the muscle mass and strength. And then on the bottom axis, this is age. So starting at an early age, middle age, and then older age compared to muscle mass and strength. Also looking at the graph, the disability threshold, kind of the dotted lines in the middle there, the disability threshold is when muscle strength is lowered, muscle quantity is lowered, muscle quality is lowered, and physical performance is lowered. So considering that disability threshold, kind of the dotted lines in the middle of the graph, think about you or people you know or people you work with. As we lose muscle, we lose functional abilities. So what are some of these abilities, and have any of you personally experienced loss of functional ability? And if you could just type in the chat. I will repeat the question. So considering the disability threshold, which talks about loss of physical function, what are some of these abilities? So I'm trying to get away from the term disability. What are some abilities that we kind of take for granted? And have any of you personally experienced loss? And then because of that, you ended up losing some muscle? And I'll just demonstrate one. I'm up, I'm down. I'm up, I'm down.
Sherry, are you able to see the chat also?
I am, it's pretty cool.
Okay, awesome, great. Just wanted to make sure.
They're pouring in. Thank you for typing them in. Somebody typed in sitting on the floor and then being able to get back up. I think that's one of the most difficult parts of my workout. Walking slower, not walking as long, climbing stairs. Yeah, getting dressed, just upper body strength. A lot of women, especially, we just don't have the upper body strength to pull the sweater off anymore. Low back pain, styling hair. Oh my gosh, yes. If you break an arm, hair is a problem and you lose muscle. Getting out of bed, oof, yes. Turning your head, oh my gosh, yeah, to back up the car. So some of us are trained up about activities of daily living, and that's what I'm seeing a lot of in the chat, just opening up a jar lid, instrumental activities of daily living. So being able to cook and take care of oneself. To prevent or delay sarcopenia development. So going back to the graph, where the lines start to go down, that's where we see loss of muscle, and that's where we see sarcopenia. Our team, our theory is gardening is hard on the body right now. I got to stop reading the chat. It's so entertaining. Thank you so much. But to prevent or delay sarcopenia development, we think that, it's like osteoporosis. We want to focus on when is peak muscle development occurring at what age, and what actions do we need to take at a younger age to hang on to that muscle before it's too late and we lose it later in life. And just to put it out there, I'm 57, so I am right there with any of the rest of you that are typing in the chat, and all of these abilities become challenging. Also, I broke my leg last year and I was no weight bearing for over 3 months. So I lost a lot of muscle in my leg, and I'm in the process of rehabbing back just to be able to walk and run. And so all of what I'm talking about today is quite personal. So we want to maintain muscle in middle age. Studies have shown that beyond the age of 50 years old, loss of leg muscle ranges from 1% to 2% per year. So add that up, starting at age 50, if we're losing 1% to 2% muscle per year, that's a very fast rate. And loss of strength has been estimated starting at age 50 to be as high as 5% per year, especially in women. So some of the smaller studies have identified some of these things. And if you look at the upper left-hand corner of the slide, so here's the definition spelled out for you. The loss of muscle mass is sarcopenia. The loss of muscle strength is dienopenia. Some studies and articles just kind of lump them together. So we'll just talk about sarcopenia today, but you get the idea. It's loss of muscle mass and strength, they go together. It's estimated that 30% of individuals age 60, which I would consider middle age, being I'm just about there. 30% of individuals age 60 and over, and 50% of individuals over 80 years start to lose so much muscle mass and strength that they get into that disability threshold. And then if you have an event, like a fall or a fracture or some chronic disease, maybe diabetes, that's when those lines start to go down and you lose muscle mass and strength more quickly. So how can we hang on to our muscle? Lifestyle. So we look at dietary protein and exercise. So protein aids, we know that protein aids in maintaining muscle. The current RDA is 0.8 grams per kilogram. I'm preaching to the choir. I'm sure you're all quite familiar. A lot of us are familiar now that 0.8 grams per kilogram probably is not an ideal number as we get older. Some have suggested almost double the RDA for older adults. And there's a couple working groups, position stands. One is the European Society for Clinical Nutrition and Metabolism. They're recommending right now 1.0 to 1.2 grams per kilogram protein for everyone. And there's another group of Bauer and Cedarholm, and I've met these guys at conferences. They're very passionate about this topic. They put together a study group in the Journal of the American Medical Directors Association, and they too recommend 1.0 to 1.2 grams per kilogram. We don't know what the magic dose is, but those are some ranges that are being thrown around right now. All right, a little bit more background. We know that reduced, not getting enough dietary protein, whatever that magic number is, has a strong theoretical link to this loss of muscle mass and strength. Recent literature supports increased protein intake higher than the RDA of 0.8 as a method for preservation of muscle mass, especially during periods of negative energy balance. So this is why I particularly wanted to study women when we looked at sarcopenia, periods of negative energy balance to attenuate age-related muscle mass loss. So you think about negative energy balance, so not getting enough to eat, right? So I have to ask another chat question. Why do especially women often have a negative energy balance? Why don't women get enough to eat during the day? What are some of the dynamics that are unique to women? Dieting, chronic dieting. Yes, that's what I was looking for. Busy with children. Absolutely. We're busy. We're multitasking. We're trying to figure out Zoom. Workload, too busy. Yes, dieting. Absolutely, there's a diet culture, especially among women. My mom, who is older than me, is still dieting. She's chronically dieting, and she's at a point where she needs to not diet anymore, but she's just lived her whole life dieting. So therefore, if you look at my third bullet point up here, greater protein intake now at a younger age, I wish she would have years ago, is likely related to better body composition through the preservation of lean body mass before we get to aging or during aging. And I'll point out some examples. We talk about protein. Somebody just chatted, I'm 62 and dieting, of course. Protein distribution, so that getting enough protein at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, or do you even eat breakfast? I have to point out my colleagues at the bottom of this slide. So the first reference, Padden-Jones. Doug Padden-Jones has done a lot of the research with sarcopenia, especially looking at weightlessness. So like anti-gravity, NASA studies, but also bed rest. So no weight bearing on that leg is a great example of weightlessness. So energy restriction, not getting enough energy is a catabolic, it's a catabolic environment. And if people just lose weight and they're not measuring body composition, chances are they're losing lean mass. And that's been shown over and over and over in studies. So a higher intake of dietary protein may be that one modifiable lifestyle change that if we are going to diet, just to make sure we get enough protein, that could undermine the reduction of the body protein pool during periods of energy reduction. And I really want to talk about today eating more protein, being conscious about it, specifically nutrient-dense protein foods. So getting more nutrient-dense protein foods can slow the loss of muscle strength as we age. And there's getting to be more and more studies that are showing this. But we need to make the changes when we're young. And I keep thinking of myself as young, but I'm really talking about starting at age throughout the lifespan, children, and on up through the lifespan before it's too late. Because as we lose lean mass, it's really hard to put it back on. Also, the reference, the Carbone article, the number 2, and the number 3 and number 4, these are all pretty recent articles on some of these concepts, if you want to read more about it. So one of the largest dietary intake studies to date has been NHANES. I think a lot of you are probably familiar with NHANES, the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey that's repeated every couple of years, but the analyses seem to come out a lot later. A study from the Journal of the American Dietetic Association, or a study from the Journal of Nutrition and Dietetics, I forget that name change, about 10 years ago, 2013, looking at about 1,700 adults age 51 to 70. You can see in the middle row on my table here, they found that these folks were getting about 15% of their calories from protein, which would meet the RDA at the time and the current RDA. However, they weren't following, the chat is very distracting, but very informing. Yes, exactly. Where are they getting those protein calories? According to NHANES, dairy towards the top, 18% of those protein calories from dairy foods, 14% from beef, and so on. However, so they were meeting the RDA. However, if the BMI range was adjusted accordingly, the 15%, so adjusted needed calories based on that age range of 51 to 70, we recommend people that age have a slightly higher BMI of about 22 to 27 compared to 18 to 24. And using the guidelines, the cut point of 0.8 grams per kilogram, there was some protein inadequacy in this data set. So if you look at it that way. Anyway, problem with this study and the NHANES at this time is they weren't breaking down those foods by nutrient density. So as you know, whole milk versus skim milk, fatty beef versus lean beef, poultry with the skin on, and skinless poultry are completely different sources of nutrients. And I've got a nice slide to kind of point out some of this coming up here. Over the last 50 years, diets have dramatically changed. Now, this is from 2018, and I actually borrowed this from Linda Van Horn's presentation that I saw in April. Linda Van Horn, Dr. Van Horn was on the Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee for the Dietary Guidelines 2020-2025 that just came out. And really getting at making choices rich in nutrients, or nutrient density should be the first choice, especially as we get older. And they did a nice job of pointing out that there's really little wiggle room for extra calories from things like added sugars and saturated fat and alcohol calories. Most of the calories a person this is what they figured, 85% of your calories are needed just to meet the nutrient recommendations from nutrient-rich foods. That only leaves you about 15% of your total calories for discretionary calories. So for example, they estimated about 85% of adults aged 19 and older do not meet the USDA dietary guidelines for dairy. So then we look at this slide taken from the dietary guidelines for Americans. This figure, I think, does a really good job of illustrating the concept of nutrient density. And if you want to look for it, it's in chapter 5 of the long version of the dietary guidelines. Anyway, the full length bars correspond to the number of calories in a serving of the food listed on the far left. So the first food, regular ground beef, the full length of the bar corresponds to the number of calories in that serving, whereas the dark green portion of the bar shows the number of calories that would be if the same food were in its nutrient dense form. So I love this visual that you can see. If you buy the extra lean ground beef, it's only 184 calories. But if you buy 25% fat beef, 75% lean, you're adding 52 calories. So a lot of people would buy, the 75% lean beef because it's cheaper, but then they're getting all these extra calories that we probably don't need. The breaded fried chicken strips, extremely popular restaurant item. And you're really eating a lot of breading and fat. So you're missing out on, an opportunity for those discretionary calories to be used for something else. There's not a lot of discretionary calories. Remember, if we're going to meet nutrient recommendations from the dietary guidelines. I'm going to skip over the next few foods, but I did want to point out the whole milk at the bottom. So a cup of whole milk, which is really popular, as you all know, 150 calories, whereas you could get by with a cup of skim milk for only 80 calories. So if we choose our foods more carefully, we can maintain calorie levels while increasing nutrients, particularly protein foods. I also wanted to look at sources of plant-based protein, because it's not just animal-based protein. There's plant-based protein, which is also hugely popular. In fact, I found some information that 19% of global new food product launches were either high protein foods or high protein drinks, and many with high protein claims. According to Mintel, and Mintel does a lot of research for the industry to kind of try to guide manufacturers what they should be marketing, and maybe products that aren't selling very well. According to Mintel, most of these protein claims were for snacks, cereals, and bars. And so here's some of the items, just random. I picked items from all the studies that we've done at NDSU. These are foods that people in our studies are using. Towards the top of the slide, the Vega 1 was actually a pretty good source of protein. You get 15 grams of protein in a scoop, but there's 140 calories, which seems kind of high just for a drink. Sunware was 17 grams. The source of protein for that guy was brown rice. And then almond milk was hugely popular with people in our studies. More and more people, as the years have gone by, have been drinking almond milk. And I don't think people are aware that it's not a good source of protein. And I see them subbing almond milk for dairy milk, and they're missing that protein opportunity. The pea protein, not to throw pea protein under the bus, But a lot of foods in our studies, if we couldn't find them in the ISHA food processor or the USDA nutrient database, we chemically analyzed them ourselves and then added those nutrients to the database so we would know. So we chemically tested quite a few protein drinks and protein bars because people in our studies are eating a lot of protein bars and drinking protein drinks. And one person happened to be drinking this pea protein drink, and the label said it had 20 grams of protein per scoop. And with the analysis, we found that that particular brand only had 1 gram of protein per scoop. So that label was definitely lying or flawed or something. And we do have foods chemically analyzed by an outside lab, and we send several samples. It's pretty reliable testing, kind of the gold standard chemical testing for protein. Rice protein powder, that one was low too. And then I just added dry beans to the slide. Again, preaching to the choir. I'm not sure if it's canned beans or dry beans. I took this off a USDA nutrient database just to remind folks that beans are a good source of protein. Other labs have done chemical testing with different protein drinks for nutrition claim, what's on the label versus what's actually in the product. And a lot of people are buying their protein powder at Walmart. I'm certainly not putting in a plug for Walmart. I'm just saying Walmart has good brands and Walmart has crummy brands. Some of the better ones were the EAS, and I know this comes out of the same lab as Ensure out of Columbus, Ohio, Pure Protein, and then some that were a little, I don't want to say stinkers, but I want to say they were stinkers, where the label said they had 30 grams of protein, but chemical analysis showed grams of protein, and that whey protein powder were lower. So I just tell people you get what you pay for, and if it's a good source of protein, it's probably, more of a name brand or probably more expensive. Anyway, just for fun and really quickly, tell me a protein drink that only has 80 calories and 8 grams of protein per cup in the chat. Okay, you all get a gold star, and I got to drink my water. Cup of skim milk, yes. Good protein drink, and it's cheap. Amid the COVID-19 crisis, I found an article that estimates that the global market for whey protein powder protein drinks was estimated at $9.7 billion in just the United States in the year 2020, and it's projected to reach $16 billion in sales by 2027. So I don't think these protein drinks are going away. So the word is out that more protein or protein is better. I think people get that, but there's still work to be done. So the RDA again is 0.8 grams per kilogram based on the average American. I think it's based on the bell curve around the 98 to 99%. From a position statement from the Journal of Nutrition and the Journal of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics from 2016, this position statement says that older adults likely need more. They don't give a number, but we know that the reasons why older adults likely need more are theorized to be related to anabolic resistance, to dietary protein intake, absorption. So the body, as we lose muscle or as intramuscular fat increases, we develop anabolic resistance, and we can't uptake the protein, the amino acids as easily as younger people. We also know that if you're starting any kind of a new exercise program, even walking, you might need a little bit more protein, especially if you've been sedentary. Certainly trained athletes wanting to increase performance can use more protein. And people that avoid animal-based foods probably need about 10% more protein, according to this position statement. Also, protein likely increases satiety, which could lead to less future cravings for junk food. So eating nutrient-dense forms of protein. So like right now, I keep in my office like packets of tuna. Certainly I've got protein drinks and protein bars, and I try to have a decent meal before I come to work and some kind of a decent lunch, but it's also a good idea to keep protein snacks. I'll probably nosh on some nuts, which has a little bit of protein throughout the day, thinking about avoiding those future cravings for probably sugar in my case. So there's good evidence, which leads us to think that the traditional recommendation of 15% of calories, or the RDA, or the 0.8 might be enough, but especially considering evidence that most of us eat the majority of our protein in the evening. Which takes us to the topic of protein distribution. So does evenly spaced distribution of protein result in more muscle mass than uneven distribution? So increased essential amino acid availability would seem to create this anabolic environment, even with bed rest. So even with the broken leg, laying on my living room floor for 3 months, I was brutally aware of the need for, even without the stimulus of exercise, protein, having that steady dose of protein is theorized to help increase muscle protein synthesis. So talking about muscle protein turnover, there's this constant dynamic where you have muscle protein synthesis, where you're using amino acids to build muscle protein, and then you have muscle protein breakdown. They're both occurring at the same time. It's a dynamic process. So the goal is to have a net protein balance. So theoretically, if you get a steady dose of protein in the diet, chances are, if we're continually having muscle protein breakdown, a continued dose of protein throughout the day would help with that net protein balance. So we end up with greater maintenance of muscle mass and strength. So that's the theory. And Doug Patton-Jones started with a lot of these studies with both astronauts and also bed rest patients, or people no weight bearing that were not allowed to have any exercise. And so one group would have the typical hospital breakfast, or the typical American breakfast, which is very low protein, especially if you don't use dairy, and a little bit of protein at lunch, like the lunch I had today at NDSU, estimated grams of protein, probably 15, something like that. And so, yeah, I'll probably have a very heavy protein dinner tonight, as opposed to the other group was 30, 30, 30. So there's been a lot of these studies, and we've come up with, somebody just wrote in the chat, the sad American diet. You guys are great. Anyway, so based on these studies, what we're recommending is 25 to 30 grams of protein 3 times a day. So the question I get from students all the time, especially, my student athletes, is why is it the same for everyone? I mean, you have little tiny 80-year-old women versus, 6'6" football players. Well, absolutely, there's differences, but just rule of thumb, about 25 to 30. And if you really want to simplify it, call it 30, 30, 30. And that's easy for people to remember. So I mean, like, not to throw my mom under the bus, but I have been working with her on this for years. And she still insists on one slice of dry toast for breakfast, but 30, 30, 30. You know, there's only a couple grams of protein in a slice of bread, right? That's what we're shooting for. But it gets more complicated because within that 30, we want to specialize and take it to the next level. But just before I flip to the next slide, I also want to point out on the other end that studies, and there's been plenty of them, really small studies and not really controlled studies, but there have been studies that show that muscle protein synthesis rates have a saturable dose response. So regarding muscle protein, dietary protein quantity, more is not better. Because study after study has shown if we get to 40 grams and more at one bolus feeding, so one meal, it doesn't have any additional benefit. So 30, 30, 30, and within that 30, if you've got about 10 grams of essential amino acids, so going back to your basic nutrition, that's what we're shooting for, which for the consumer, that's probably too complicated, but I feel like we can train them up to 30, 30, 30. So I really like that as kind of a rule of thumb. Anyway, among our data, we have not yet analyzed this relationship. We're getting to it, but it just takes forever. However, I was excited that Fanny just ran a small study looking at distribution of protein intake. And for our study with the 192 women, just quickly, our 3 time periods were defined as anything eaten before 11:30, 11:30 to 4 o'clock, and 4 o'clock or after. And I should point out, to be in our study, you were not allowed to work on the night shift because we wanted to look at protein distribution. So if they worked night shift, they were not allowed to be in the study. Anyway, so we defined those 3 time periods, and Fanny, through the statistics in our data set, found that achieving more than 25 grams of protein during the more time periods you got 25 grams of protein, the more the higher the odds that you would have increased bone mineral density and bone mineral content. So that was exciting to me. And I saw your note, Wendy, we're getting there. So 30, 30, 30, 25 to 30 grams of protein. What does 25 grams of protein look like? I borrowed this slide from the Beef Commission. So you see beef at the bottom, but really quickly, quinoa is a great source of protein, but to get 25 grams of quinoa protein, you'd have to eat 3 cups, and 3 cups of quinoa also has 15 grams of fiber, and 6.5 tablespoons of peanut butter also contains 50 grams of fat. And you get the idea. And another way to compare nutrient density among foods that are relatively high in protein are to also take a quick scan at the micronutrients. All of these foods are nutrient dense along the top of the slide. But again, beef comes out ahead because of other things like B12 and iron and zinc. Recently, getting at the essential amino acids before we run out of time, using the indicator amino acid method. So there's these phenylalanine tracers that are used in research. And this study just came out in 2021. We have more evidence that shows the significance of leucine that kind of turns on the switch for muscle protein synthesis. Now, leucine is one of the essential amino acids. Leucine is a branched chain amino acid, particularly animal-based foods are a good source of lutein. So some of the foods are up here on the slide. So the new recommendations are 2 to 3 grams leucine per meal. So 30, 30, 30. And then within the 30, 2 to 3 grams leucine. So trying to find those foods that contain leucine has been part of the mission of our studies. And it's been tricky because a lot of the databases don't have leucine set up yet. But this is the type of thing that we're looking for in our studies. So again, just for fun, what I've listed here are 10 different foods, starting with whey protein powder, lean beef, chicken breast, and etc. I'll let you read the 10 foods. I'd like you to think about leucine, that essential amino acid, and guess which one is the highest source of leucine, given the portion size, the second, the third, and so on. So just take a minute and scribble them out or write them down. If you're really ambitious, put it in the chat. Number 1 is this food. Number 2, I want you to rank them. Given the portion size. Okay, well, we're running short on time, so I'm going to go ahead and flip. So if you guess that they were already in order 1 through 10, you get the gold star. So the best source of leucine, and remember, based on evidence, we're recommending 2 to 3 grams leucine per feeding, 3 feedings a day. So if you could throw a scoop of whey protein on whatever 3 times a day, somebody got a gold star. You'd be meeting the recommendations, and so on. And a cup of skim milk has 0.85, but like my husband, he never has 8 ounces. He would have 16 ounces of milk. And by the way, the leucine in 1%, 2% skim milk, they're all the same. Okay, well, I'm going to be out of time, so I'm not going to go through the methods for our studies. The Dexa Scan is so neat in our lab. Lower left-hand corner, that Jamar hand grip, that is the gold method for analyzing strength. And any of your groups out there could buy that Jamar hand grip. It's probably about 250 bucks. Drum roll. One of the neatest things we came up with is looking at the ratio of leucine to protein as a measure of protein quality. So maybe the future, that's something that can be looked at. I know nutrient density is hard to define. So is dietary protein quality. Without the drum roll, I can just end and say that we do have good evidence that shows that dietary protein from animal-based foods was better related to muscle quality and hand grip strength in the 192 women we trained. It wasn't that plant-based protein was not a good thing. It just plant-based protein was not significant to the model statistically, but animal-based dietary protein definitely was. And for all the testing we did, we would recommend just a balanced diet that includes nutrient-dense protein food sources. So if anything that I wanted to share with you today are some of those key sources of leucine. And to get the leucine for the plant-based proteins, you can get it, but you've got to eat more Overall dietary protein, we found that for each 1 gram per day increase in dietary protein intake, that predicted a decreased level of body fat, a teeny amount, 0.092%, but we did find that relationship, and we would hope that other studies kind of look to the same thing, you know, to increase that protein amount in the future for the RDA would be my goal. And I guess I've seen like 500 questions, which is awesome. Maybe my my proctors can tell me which one to answer.
Sure, I've got a long list for you. We'll go back to the beginning, and one of the questions was about, can muscle mass and strength be rebuilt?
Yes, and I'm the poster child for it. I lost a lot of muscle in my leg. I don't know if y'all are aware what no weight bearing means. It means literally you're on crutches or a wheelchair and you're not allowed to put any weight on that leg. So you could see that I lost muscle and the calf was just kind of hanging here. And I was very conscious about my nutrient density, not just protein, but everything. And certainly as we get older, it's more difficult, but we have studies of people up to age 85, diet and exercise, they can put muscle back on. It takes longer.
That's encouraging, though. That's good news to hear. And one of the questions was, I missed the age for the 1.0, 1.2 grams, I believe, recommended amount of protein.
We're recommending these position statements for all adults age 18 and higher. However, there's other groups that are wanting even higher levels for age groups as we get older. So like age 65 and older, there's a group saying 1.5 grams per kilogram is warranted. There's another group that's calling for 2.0 by different age groups, but 1.2 for everyone, just getting rid of the 0.8 altogether.
Great, thank you. And there was a question on, what about protein meal replacement meals? I'm not sure if they were, I'm just getting your input on that, what your stance on that is.
Protein replacement meals, like protein shakes.
I'm assuming so.
I would say in balance with, you know, my husband uses those in the office, and along with it, you know, he'll have like a bowl of cereal with Wheaties and an apple and an orange. You've still got to get your other food groups, of course.
Most definitely.
But yeah, it can be a replacement for something like those chicken strips or that cheeseburger.
Sure. One participant said, I have a memory of a study long ago recommending 30 grams dietary protein at meals maintain muscle mass better than 90 grams protein eaten in smaller amounts over the day. But what are your thoughts on the recommendation changes over time?
So yeah, it's the science is evolving, and certainly I was reading studies this morning just to see if there's anything new out there, and we don't know. I see the evidence really leaning towards this steady dose, feeding 3 times a day. Certainly if you're trying to heal from an injury, I would recommend 4 or 5 feedings a day if you can handle it. Just that steady dose of amino acids. Like if people have had some kind of a trauma, like a burn or any kind of injury.
Now, I'll ask one more question because I know we are over time, but we can continue with the Q&A, and the session will be recorded or is being recorded. There was quite a few questions on vegetarian and vegan diets, and I know you shared a little bit about that. But what would be your recommendation for protein, the best protein source for vegetarians?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And I have several undergraduate dietetic students right now that have been trying to plan plant-based diets for our restaurant that we run. And it's really hard to get up to 30 with things like black beans and edamame, which I think are really good sources, and quinoa, you end up with quite a few grams of fiber. And personally, I get really full, but I think you build up to that and you get used to that amount of fiber in your gut. But I think it's going to be real challenging, especially because we're recommending 10% higher than that 25 to 30 grams. It's a real challenge using all plant-based foods. So yeah, the jury's out. I'd like to see more studies looking at this.
And so we do have a couple more questions. Do you have time for that today?
Me, yes.
Okay, for those of you, I mean, if you need to go, we understand, but we hope you'll hang in there with us or revisit the recording. So one of the final questions was, if you follow the MyPlate method, will you get sufficient amount of protein in your diet?
That's a really good question, because it's hard for people to understand what a gram of protein is. I don't know. That sounds like a good research study. Somebody should look at that. I haven't seen a study that's measured it.
Okay, and what advice do you have for people who may have dietary restrictions, such as diabetes, high cholesterol, or have to monitor calories versus carbs versus protein?
I think this is even more important for those people because they've got anabolic resistance. They're having a hard time metabolizing that protein. So they need to try even harder than some of the rest of us that are not having to struggle with diabetes. Absolutely. I think it could help them with their success of managing their blood sugars and such.
And team, did I miss any other big questions that came through?
I think you pretty much got all of them. I mean, there were loads of them and lots of great comments.
I think some were addressed within the presentation. Mm-hmm.
It was so much fun reading everyone's comments. There's humor out there still. It's just, there's humanity. Yay.
All right. Says someone said there was one about protein being too much is a bad thing.
Sure. Well, protein is expensive. That's for sure. And it's a waste of money. Studies have shown over 40 grams per meal doesn't give you much more response anyway.
That's great. Thank you for that. And with that, we will thank you so much for this incredibly informative presentation. I feel like I need to go work out now. We appreciate your time and expertise today. And thank you guys so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you at our very next session.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so appreciative.
Thank you so much.